We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by FanDuel. These are the only Thanksgiving wide receivers that matter for fantasy football and DFS, at least to me. Matt Harmon is with us, Yahoo Sports, Reception Perception.
I love Thanksgiving. I love the holiday. I love, football on all day. Even if this year, man, it feels like we do not have a great slate of games, and it feels like every team going into it is hampered in some way.
It does kind of feel that way, especially with some of these wide receivers that we would normally be talking about from some of these teams just not available. Obviously, Amari Cooper has already been ruled out. We'll see if we get CeeDee Lamb at the time of this recording. It's not 100% that he won't play, but we don't expect CeeDee to play, right?
Yeah, I've been preparing this week as if he is not going to play, but if he does, that would be a pleasant surprise, and he would be probably the clear-cut top play on the board for Thanksgiving if he does go out there.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. So let's talk about our first wide receiver today. It is from that game, Michael Gallup. He's 6,500 on FanDuel. He's going to be extremely popular, but definitely a good starting point for this slate, right?
Yeah, I think so. When you look at the way that Kansas City came out there last week and just kind of threw the kitchen sink at Dallas, Dallas was behind the sticks basically all game. I think they'll be able to run a much more efficient offense against Oakland, which is odd that I'm going to kind of talk about the running game here when it relates to Michael Gallup, but I think that's going to matter a lot. Like, we want this Cowboys passing attack being able to play in positive game script. We've seen that basically throughout the year. Like, this is not ever going to be the voluminous, 400 plus yards a week Dallas passing attack that it was in 2020, but that's probably better for the long term. It's better for the efficiency. It's better for just the overall production of the offense. So there's that part of it, and I think they'll be able to do that against the Raiders defense here. Like, we're looking at a defense that just got bludgeoned by Joe Mixon last week. They're pretty much get beat up by running backs every single week, and I think with Tyron Smith likely coming back for the Dallas Cowboys, they'll be able to run the ball with Zeke. They'll be able to run the ball with Tony Pollard and staying in positive game scripts. Like, I think if both CD and Amari are out, Gallup's probably going to see, 8 to 10 targets again. Mm-hmm. And in that situation, he's just going to be a great core play there because of the volume, because of his own ability. I think this will really be kind of his breakout game here in 2020. He's a great separator against man coverage, good on the perimeter in contested situations. This should be a really nice spot for him.
Yeah, people forget how excited we were about Michael Gallup coming into the season. Obviously, he gets that injury, and then this offense is a little bit different than we all expected, and now people just don't like Michael Gallup and basically everything we were talking about. So I do think on this slate he'll be popular, but I'm with you on that. One thing that I wanted to touch on before we moved on from Gallup was if we were to run the Sims, runthesims.com/Holka, promo code will get you 10% off. We are basically simulating the slate 10,000 times, but Michael Gallup is the highest frequency in the optimal lineup of any wide receiver. At 6,500, that price tag, pretty tough to get away from unless you're playing some super large field contest. But in that same game, Harmon, we have Hunter Renfrow, 6,200, pretty similar price point. I think both of these guys are going to draw some ownership. Obviously, this game number 2 does have the highest total by a pretty significant margin. But tell us why you like Renfrow coming off of a game, one of his only duds really of the entire season.
Right. And I just feel like that is the outlier, not the trend. We've seen Renfrow be one of the consistent parts of this passing attack. And it's funny, too. It's just nothing else going on in the Raiders passing game.
Right.
Bryan Edwards, he's going to I say this with Bryan Edwards, I don't think he was a bad bet coming into the year because he was basically in redraft. He was very, very cheap, except there towards the end when he got all that camp hype. They literally compare him to Terrell Owens and Randy Moss combined. And they use him like that too. They only use him on perimeter vertical plays. His best game came in that last time they played the Chiefs, and they actually used him on some interior vertical shots. I'd like to see them do that a little more. The Deshaun Jackson thing is not there. Renfrow to me just is the consistent wide receiver in this offense. I think he's a good player. I think he was kind of underrated coming into this year. When you look at his reception perception results from 2019, it just looks like a very strong, solid starting slot receiver. Good success on the slant, the curls, the digs, everything like that. Overall, I think this is it's a spot for Hunter Renfrow where I think he can get a lot of underneath targets. I think the Raiders will be playing from behind. I think they'll be, sort of dinking and dunking against a pass rush in Dallas. It's been pretty good despite missing some players there. Micah Parsons is the lock favorite for defensive rookie of the year. So I think this is a good spot for Renfrow to get 9 to 10 targets and just pile up some steady production.
Yeah, there's not really like a ton of wide receivers to pay up for. We'll get to the Bills receivers and Stephon Diggs in a second. But before we get there, I want to talk about another one of your guys, Harmon, coming into the season. Darnell Mooney, he's 6,800, a little bit more expensive than someone like Hunter Renfrow, and he is in game number 1, but he's going to be pretty popular as well in a game that I guess isn't too exciting overall.
No, it is not exciting. It's not an exciting
You're not going to
game.
give us the bull case on this game being like 40 to 35?
No. Well, I mean, the Lions defense is awful. So, I mean, there is that. And it's funny too, like Matt Nagy is obviously, persona non grata in Chicago right now. Like they're literally harassing his kid at high school football games with fire Matt Nagy chants, which like, give me a break, dude. Like you come back to reality here, people. But, beyond that, yeah, I think the offense looked, relatively decent on some deep shots with Andy Dalton. We're going to get Andy Dalton, which is like the fact we don't get Justin Fields. It's like, what's even the point of having the Bears on Thanksgiving? It's crazy too. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank God it's first game. I know this is like now we're talking about, we're trying to crunch a lot of information here in like a short amount of time, but dude,
good, right?
Like it's awful that we've got the Lions every year on Thanksgiving enough, and now it's like every 2 or 3 years we see the Bears versus Lions on Thanksgiving. It's like a double slap in the face from the NFL. So we've got to do something about that.
Why are the division teams playing them more on like that? I get it. Their division, like the Vikings are on Thanksgiving a lot too for that reason, but like let's get some Chiefs on Thanksgiving. Let's get something, right? Like we have the technology. We can plan this in advance with the schedule, right? We can play Lions versus someone cool. I don't know, just weird.
The problem there is, Joe, we're all going to watch anyways. Like the TVs will all be on, so the ratings will be there. So there's no reason for them to change. That's the only, hey, we talk a lot of numbers and data on these fantasy shows. The only numbers and data that matter are the actual ratings. So there is that there. So yeah, no, I think that Darnell Mooney though, great speed receiver. We've seen that all year. I think he's a guy that, has played the most consistent in this Bears passing attack with Allen Robinson being banged up and not being on the same page as Justin Fields. 16 targets only led to a few receptions last week, but that volume should be there. I actually don't even hate Marquise Goodwin in this game as well. Likely the number 2 pass catcher beyond Darnell Mooney. So if you're looking for cheaper plays, desperation guys, like I don't mind attacking this Lions defense because it is that bad. And, it's just unfortunate that I feel like the Lions wide receivers, you can't really run anything back there because they're just a complete dead zone at that position. There's just nothing consistent from a volume perspective there.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Because you, in theory, would like to take some shots in this game with some guys that are going to be a little bit lower owned in DFS. But like the only guy that I was even like kind of considering is like Armon St. Brown, maybe. But man, it's just so hard to get behind any part of this Detroit offense right now that's not named DeAndre Swift. So I think we can move on from there because I wanted to make sure we had enough time to talk about these Bills wide receivers because I think that this group as a whole is very interesting and it's very, I guess this is like kind of what could break or make this entire slate, right? Stephon Diggs is going to be extremely popular, but also these other options kind of down the line, it's a little bit more spread out now that we got Dawson Knox back. So what do you see from this wide receiver group, Diggs, and I guess some of the cheaper guys?
Yeah, it's funny with this Saints passing attack, it's kind of like feast or famine there. Like, or excuse me, their pass defense. It's very like feast or famine with this pass defense because they have a cornerback in Marshawn Lattimore that can really take away your top threat. You look at the last few games that the Saints have played, they played the Bucks and like obviously they mostly held Mike Evans in check outside of like a one vertical shot there. And Chris Godwin just went off in the slot. You look at them when they played the Falcons. Marshawn Lattimore, big part of them limiting Kyle Pitts in that game. Olamide Zaccheaus or whatever has like a big game against this Saints passing attack. So it's one of those situations where I think that like secondary threat can have a pretty big game. So I'm in on Diggs. I think Diggs is good enough to beat any matchup. Like there's no issue there, but just like Mike Evans got home eventually on that because he's a great player. Diggs is, I think, an even better receiver, so he can get there. Of course, Stephon Diggs, we've seen him be more involved in the scoring area recently, or at least more successful in the scoring area recently. So that's been positive to see, but I don't mind sprinkling in like Manny Sanders, who hasn't had a huge game in quite some time, but revenge spot against the Saints from last year. Not really, but I mean, at the same time, like he's a guy that hasn't had that volume. He hasn't had that big game in a while, but I could see this being a spot where he pops back up for a big game. And like, cause we've just seen that secondary threat have pretty good lines against the New Orleans pass defense. They're great at taking away tight ends. They're great at taking away a team's top threat, but I do think that this might be a spot where that secondary guy pops back up.
Yeah, and the Saints, like I always kind of think of them as this like stout defense in some ways, but they have been absolutely thrashed lately by a couple not very good teams. So I'm interested in that. Obviously, I think they have the nightmares of Stephon Diggs from when he was in a Vikings uniform. So we'll see if they can shut him down in this one. What do you think about Gabriel Davis? I think he's kind of an interesting flyer at the super cheap end of this. And I guess one of my biggest questions on this entire thing is who negatively impacts other players the most. So you think like Sanders impacts Diggs the most, maybe Gabriel Davis impacts Beasley the most, or am I just like making that up in my head?
I think that there's sort of like almost like a weird love triangle between Dawson Knox, Cole Beasley, and Gabe Davis, because I think like Gabe Davis can be a threat in the red zone, which eats out of Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox is a threat in the vertical game over the middle of the field, which eats out of Cole Beasley. And if like, I think Beasley and Davis don't really affect each other because Davis is like a pure perimeter receiver. And if then I guess in that way, if they are going to play more Gabe Davis, they'll put him on the outside. They'll go 4 wide, and then it's Sanders and Cole Beasley in the slot. And I think that throwing the ball to Emmanuel Sanders is probably a little bit more efficient than throwing a ball to Cole Beasley because he's just a pure underneath threat against zone coverage and everything. And because this team is relatively man coverage heavy, that's why I think I really like going back to, and I think, by the way, just on Gabe Davis, like I think he's still an extremely raw player, which is why they've added, that's why they didn't just like, okay, we got John Brown out the building here, let's go just promote Gabe Davis. No, they try and like do a 1-for-1 replacement with Emmanuel Sanders. So I think that's really where we're at with Gabe Davis. Like again, it's a small slate like this where I'm trying to look around at all these receiver cores. Nothing really in Dallas stands out to me. I'm not trying to like play Cedric Wilson. I'm not trying to play Noah Brown if there's no CeeDee Lamb. I'm not trying to mess around with the Lions receivers. We just talked about that. The Saints, I don't even really want to mess around with that crew either because there's so many receiver cores I'm almost just like completely writing off. I think Gabe Davis on a small field tournament, it does make sense because he's a guy that can make big plays like in a splash sense against a secondary that's given up big games to secondary or even third level threats. So I don't hate the way you're thinking about that. It's just like, is that the way they're going to go? Are they going to spread the ball out? And I think that probably is the way they do it because, people are harping on the Bills about like they can't run the ball. They're not a physical team, which is probably a fair criticism, but this isn't the matchup to try to correct that because the Saints, for one thing, they have been a relatively good defense against the run of the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, and Gabe Davis is like significantly lower owned than almost every player in this entire game. So I'm kind of grasping for straws a little bit on some guys on some lineups that might be struggling a little bit going into game number 3. Circling back to Diggs quickly, though, Harmon, one thing I'm trying to do a little bit better, and Reeves has kind of forced this on me, but I think it's really good, is trying to go a little bit more micro, not necessarily like wide receiver cornerback stuff, but I do really like the man coverage versus zone coverage stuff because you see some of these wide receivers, and you can correct me or probably say this a little bit more eloquently than I can, but some wide receivers get smashed against different types of coverages, right? Is Diggs one of those guys that obviously he can win anywhere, but does he have any drastic splits or anything like that we should be aware of?
Well, I don't know about drastic splits. I do think he is one of the best receivers against man coverage. And I think that's a part of what's flummoxed these Buffalo Bills more is that teams have been content to, play. I talked about like cover 2 defenses being like or 2 high defenses being like the boogeyman of the NFL, I think on your show last week.
Yeah.
But that is a real thing, I think, with the Bills is that they have like the basis of their offense is a quarterback who's good against man coverage because he's a mobile guy, and they have the best man coverage receiver in Stephon Diggs. He was number 1 last year in success rate versus man coverage. Actually, number 1 all time in reception perception history was his success rate versus man coverage score last year. So they have, and even a team like the Dolphins, who's one of the very few man heavy defenses in the NFL, they were pretty content to just sit back in zone coverage and, let Josh Allen try to matriculate the ball down the field, which, an impatient quarterback like Josh Allen, an even stronger degree than it is with Patrick Mahomes. Like we've been harping on Mahomes about like not being patient and just taking what's there or whatever. Allen is even a greater degree of that. So I think there is some real legitimate like football reasons why this team would struggle against zone coverage as opposed to man coverage. And I think that's a big part of what's hampered their passing attack of late. Diggs is great against anything though. And I mean, from a Saints perspective, they are a more like man heavy physical press you at the line defense. So We'll see if they can change their stripes. Like I said, a team like Miami just did that recently. We'll see if the Bills can, or if the Saints can pull that off against the Bills. But yeah, I definitely think that's something that is important to pay attention to, especially within a receiver core too, because you've seen that, like the games where the Bills offense might have struggled a little bit, but Cole Beasley has still had big games because Cole Beasley is a slot receiver. We know slot receivers typically face more zone coverage. They're better at beating zone coverage than they are man coverage. So that is something I think from a football angle, it does make sense, and it is something to pay attention to.
Yeah, real football reasons right over to the real data reasons. Outside of Michael Gallup, the number one wide receiver in the optimals right now after running the Sims 10,000 times, Stephon Diggs, 35% of the optimal lineups. All right, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Short on time this week, so I want everyone to know that there are a bunch more videos for the 3-game slate on this playlist right here, and we'll see you guys on Sunday.